Hi, Kent.
Moi.
Bonjour.
Oops, I got my headphones off. So much technology.
I know.
There we go.
All right.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great, thanks. You want to try a share screen real quick?
Yes. So do you want, it's up to you. You can either share your screen and flip through it, or I can share my screen and you give me verbal cues.
Let's try mine because I've got 3 different screens I want to try out.
Okay. So you should be able to just share it there at the bottom.
Okay, I'll give it a whirl. First one, can you see that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. I'm just going to go once. There we go. See it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Perfect. All right, I've got another one. And hit screen share. How about that one?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, that was my trick. I finally worked out. I've been trying to figure out all summer how I could use an external camera. And by God, I finally got it yesterday.
Oh, yay.
That's a live shot.
Oh, whoa, that's awesome.
So that will be used to show the plants while I talk about the plants and some other things that I'm going to share with the group. And then I've got one of, you like that?
I do. That's so smart, because instead of having to show it in front of the camera, you can show it. That's awesome.
Yeah, it just doesn't work that way. So this is my 3rd one. And so I just want to kind of talk a little bit about Indian health and a little bit about COVID, since that's on everybody's minds, and share with them what's happening with Indian health in Oklahoma. But, look at out west, 40%. So.
Yeah, wow. That's great. I think this will be awesome. We've had quite a range of ages. So it'll kind of be, all right, sorry, I was looking at one of the parents was texting me. So it's kind of been when you ask for feedback, you'll get sort of different levels. So I know you know how to manage that. You'll have some that are responding at a certain level, and then you'll have some who are, yes, I saw this kind of thing.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's what I tried to think about as I put all this together, and that's why I limited the number of slides. I want it to be as interactive as possible, and make it active rather than just a PowerPoint slide point. We could do that, record it, and send it to them. But I'll tell them they can ask questions at any time. Stop me and ask, and that if they want to ask the medical student, Mariah, I think she's going to be able to join us for the entire duration. And so I'm excited to have her on board, and I think they'll enjoy hearing from her as well.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. We have been, just because, some different families or households have a lot of background noise. So we have them set to be muted when they get on. And then I usually kind of go through and we'll, make sure they're muted, especially if I can hear noise coming from a lot of them. But they all know how to unmute themselves. So you just.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So a couple of them are really good about just jumping, unmuting themselves and jumping in when they have a question, but I think it works best for the whole group if you'll kind of open the floor and say, okay, unmute yourself and tell me what you think about this.
Okay, thanks. I'll do that. And then just so you know, I'm not going to go through that entire PowerPoint slide set at one time. I'm going to kind of flip between the PowerPoint slides and my camera and the Indian stats, and then I told Mariah her cues when that PowerPoint comes up with her name that she's on deck.
Perfect.
And so, I'll kind of just let her talk, and then when she's done, then I'll move into the plants. And Thanks for letting me talk a little bit about addiction. I work with a guy named Reggie Whitten who created a thing called FATE, Fighting Addiction Through Education. And we're working on a spin-off of that of Native FATE. And so I think it's really important for these students to hear, you know, about addiction and how it affects Native Americans and why he didn't it 100 years ago. But I'll save that story for a little bit later.
That's awesome. You know, I'd love to connect you with Bert Pata, he's Kiowa, but he's worked for the Citizen Potawatomi Nation for years. And he runs our reentry program. So for incarcerated individuals, and it's both for incarcerated individuals, but they also have an arm of the program for diversionary. So anybody with a court action, but who has not yet been incarcerated, but maybe looks like they're heading down that path. They also work with those individuals. And it's, I believe, throughout the entire state. I'm not sure on the jurisdiction. It may be our 5.5 county, but it's not just only Potawatomis. It's Native Americans, at least in the 5.5 county region, maybe even the entire state. Okay. And they'll start working with them if they're incarcerated a year before they're before they're released. Anyway, one of the things he does is like a weekly talking circle with people, and addiction comes up a lot. He also runs a bi-monthly sweat lodge that's open for a lot of people who are suffering from addiction. So I bet he'd be really interested in what you're working on with that FATE.
Yeah, I know Reggie would really like working with him, and we can talk more later about that. I'm going to go bring the dog in, so I don't have to worry about him for the next hour and a half.
Hey, I get it. No worries at all. Yeah, I'm going to just kind of leave it on here. So just jump back on whenever you're ready. We've had some students who hopped on early, so I'll just leave it on and work while it's waiting for people to come in. So.
Oh, and that's what I'm gonna leave mine on. I'm just gonna kill the video. And if any time during the discussions I'm having trouble on my end, or I think I am, I might shut my video off just momentarily because I am working remotely and from a hotspot. Is the sound and everything okay for you?
Yep, it's sounding great for me so far. But yeah, if anything pops up, we'll handle it as we come. Yesterday, when Dr. Volberding was presenting, she had issues. One of her video that she had loaded didn't play like she planned, but she handled it like a pro and was able to pull it up on YouTube. And you know, we're here to help too. So if I've got your PowerPoint. If I need to share my screen, we'll make it work.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in just a little bit.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I have a tiger lily.
I see that, Blaine. Did you know those are my favorite flowers? Did you pull it from your yard? Where'd you find it?
On the driveway.
Nice.
They do pop up there.
If I'm correct, right here behind, just right here on that fence, those are all tiger lilies. And then I've got some out there. I've also got a bunch of other edible stuff. So
nice. Did you know you could eat those, Blaine? You're muted.
Yeah, you can eat the petals once they're dried. and they taste delicious. Kind of like the chicken that we made. I already had a kebab of it.
Oh, that's nice. You all had the cooking class today. How'd it go? You're muted, Blaine. Okay. Oh, just as I said that. We'll probably have a few others who will be still joining us. But if you'll go ahead and, if you can, please turn on your camera. We'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome to our third day of our virtual STEM camp. We are extremely excited today to welcome two individuals from Oklahoma State University. One is Dr. Kent Smith, who basically has dedicated his professional career to recruiting Native American students to pursue pre-medical. So if you're interested in the health sciences, becoming a doctor, nurse, something like that, Dr. Kent Smith is your guy to talk to. And then we also have one of his students that he works with, Mariah West, on the call. So from here, I'm gonna kick it over to Dr. Smith and Mariah.
Bozo, Chokma, Halito, Osio, hello in Potawatomi, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Cherokee, a few of the tribes that I commonly work with, and I hope I pronounced the Potawatomi hello appropriately. Great to see everybody. You didn't know doctors made house calls, did you? Well, in the virtual world, we can. I'm not a physician, but I am a doctor of philosophy. I have a PhD in zoology. I earned from the University of Oklahoma. My areas of expertise are evolutionary biology, anatomy, and paleontology. So how did I end up at a medical school? Good question. My research is on vertebrate fossils, in particular mammals like saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and even little bats, rats, and things like that can tell us a lot about the history. And so if you join us tomorrow, that's a story for tomorrow, and I'll share it with you in more detail. So how does an anatomist, vertebrate paleontologist end up at a medical school? Well, I have a very broad, very deep knowledge of anatomy, including what we call gross anatomy, which is the study of cadavers or human remains, so that we can train our budding physicians. Student Dr. Mariah West will introduce herself in just a moment, but that's what I do. I teach gross anatomy. I lead the course of gross anatomy to teach graduate and medical students a little bit about anatomy, start building their toolkit, if you will, for medicine. And today's topic, we're going to talk about Indigenous health. So I can tell you more about my paleo side tomorrow if you join in. And today's focus is on Indigenous health. I want to share my screen with you just for a moment. And I'm going to pose a question to you. Can everybody see the screen okay? Okay, you can nod or wave, thumbs up if you can see the screen. Thank you. So what does Indigenous health mean to you? Does anyone want to pipe in and say what they think of Indigenous health? When you hear Indigenous health, what does that mean? What pops into your head? Okay, I'll help you out a little bit. How about if you're, go ahead.
It's working with doing either like work with tribal health services.
Yes, sir. So for example, Indian healthcare system, some of you may have visited Indian healthcare system to be seen by a physician or other clinician. So oftentimes when we think of Indigenous health, we think of that federal government entity, the Indian health system. Or if you work with a tribe like the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, you might think more in the line of tribal medicine, where you have tribal people taking care of tribal people. And that's one thing that we're really working hard on at Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences, College of Osteopathic Medicine, is to recruit and train American Indians to go back into tribal communities to treat their own. So grow and treat your own. So tribal medicine, hopefully you'll start thinking about that when you hear indigenous health. Or you might think about ethnobotany or traditional medicine. So a lot of plants, a lot of animals and animal parts are used in traditional medicines. And we'll talk a little bit about that today as we go over a few of the plants that maybe you found or that I have collected recently and we'll share with you in just a little bit. So those are just some kind of generalizations of what I think a lot of people think of when we say indigenous health. As I mentioned, at OSU Center for Health Sciences, we're recruiting American Indians into medicine, and I want to welcome and thank student Dr. Mariah West. She's a second-year medical student. She just finished her first year of medicine at OSU. She's worked with me all summer in the gross anatomy lab, actually virtual gross anatomy lab, to teach graduate students anatomy. And I'm pleased to have her here. Student Dr. West, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested into medicine?
Sure, yeah. Thank you for the introduction. Guys, I just wanted to tell you that I'm super excited to be here with you and hope that you get a lot out of this and ask me anything. I'd love to answer any questions that you have at the end. So I'm from a small town in northern Oklahoma called Perry. So I'm from a small community of about 5,000 people. I graduated high school with about 82, so I like the small town feel. But when I was little, from the age that I was born until about 10 years old, my grandmother lived with my family. So we took care of her, and she had some strokes and stuff. So I learned about taking care of others from a young age. And I realized that, you know, that's kind of what I wanted to do for my career. So once I got into high school, I started taking more science classes. I always loved science. And it wasn't until my sophomore year of high school that I took human anatomy that I realized how much I wanted to study the human body and know more about it and really dive into that. So I took on the course of going to college to get a biology degree. And I went to another small school called East Central University in Ada, Oklahoma, if you guys know where that's at. So I went to a small school. It felt like family. It felt like home. And I felt like that really helped me get through college also. Another thing you should know about me is I was an athlete all throughout my life. I played softball from the age of 6 until the age of 22. So I played 4 years of college softball, and that's kind of where I got my competitiveness, where I got my determination and everything, and not wanting to give up on anything. And I think that's some really good characteristics you need to have to go into medical school, and especially to make it through your first year. As we just did, it was very tough, but just, I would say, apply yourself and really, really be determined to get something, to accomplish anything that you put your mind to. So in college, freshman year, you're just kind of taking classes, and between my freshman and sophomore year, I went back home and actually worked for the maintenance department of a place called Ditch Witch, which is in Perry, and I mowed grass all summer. So I went back for my sophomore year of college, and again, just taking classes, preparing to go into medical school, trying to get good grades. And between my sophomore and junior year, I participated in a program called the NARCH program, which is the Native American Research Centers for Health through OU Health Science Center. And this gave me an opportunity to make money while doing research on OU's campus. So that was really awesome. and a great opportunity for Native Americans to get involved in research and in science as a college undergraduate student. Junior year, when you go back to college, you're pretty much preparing to take your MCAT, which is the regulatory test to get into medical school. That's how they compare everyone, all the students applying for medical school. And then senior year is when you get your application done, you do your interviews, and you try to get into medical school. So my experience was my junior year, between my junior and senior year, the summer, I took my MCAT on June 30th, and then I started getting ready to do my application. So the application process into medical school is pretty long. It's kind of intimidating, but you have to just take it one step at a time, and once you get through it, it's great and everything's turned in and you feel good. You just kind of wait. It's a waiting game after that. I ended up having to take my MCAT test twice. So I took it again in September. So I took it June 30th and then September 1st, and turned in my application around October. How the application cycle works is you turn in one application to all the schools, and then the school will contact you back with a secondary application. So I got my secondary application about November, and then I turned that in, and then you go into an interview on the campus of the school that you're going to. So for me, OSU, I got an interview with them. And interviews are a little scary. You're really nervous, but the cool thing about OSU is I was more nervous in my car than I was when I got in the building. They made me feel at home. They made me feel like I was family. And after walking out of my interview, I knew that was the place I wanted to be for my medical career. Yeah, so that's kind of the process of getting into medical school and going through that. It's a lot, but it's very rewarding. This first year of medical school has been definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but it's been very rewarding. I've met some amazing people, got to learn from Dr. Smith and other anatomists, and just learning about the human body is something that is awesome. So guys, just if you're interested in science and interested in everything, keep pushing for it. Don't lose sight of what you're going for. Stay determined. And yeah, that's kind of my story of getting into medical school. I think you're muted still.
Oh, I was just going to see if anyone had any questions for you. Anyone have any questions for student Dr. West?
I have a question. So for these students who are ranging from 9 to 17, 18 years old, what do you recommend they do now if they're interested in attending medical school down the line?
For the ages about 14 to 17, I would say really take as many science classes as you can, and maybe try to get with a family physician or someone that you can go, maybe shadow and walk around with for a day, so you can see if maybe being a doctor is something you want to do. From the ages about 9 to 12, I would say do anything sciencey. Go put some baking soda and vinegar together, do something that, sparks your interest into why things do what they do, or the environment and plants and all that. Just stay in science and see how much that sparks your interest.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I think student Dr. West will remain with us. So if you think of something you want to ask her, interrupt at any time and ask her. That's what she's here for. And I think in part to answer the question that was asked, what you're doing today is a great first step into getting into the network, getting to know people like student Dr. West and myself, people in your tribe who are in education and provide programming like this. This is all very helpful and a step in the right direction, in my opinion. So I applaud the Citizen Potawatomi Nation for putting on such camps and caring so much about their citizens, especially with health and education. So thank you all. All right.
The thanks should go.
Go ahead.
Well, I said the thank you should go to you, Doctor.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Okay, so we're back to my screen. Can everybody see that okay? I can see student Dr. West, so I'm going to rely on her. Thank you. And so, again, thank you, Dr. West, or student Dr. West, for joining us today. I appreciate that. So a couple of slides I want to share with you before we move into the fun hands-on things. At least it's hands-on for me, but hopefully you brought some plants and it'll be hands-on for you as well. So everybody's familiar with Western science, Western medicine, and that's kind of what's practiced in the mainstream. It's all based on science. We may do scientific studies. We may do clinical trials. So for example, you may have heard of this little virus running around, COVID-19, and they're talking about science and they're talking about clinical trials. Well, that's all part of Western medicine, and that's a good thing. And where do they get their materials? Well, a lot of materials are raw materials, and a lot of those raw materials are then synthesized in laboratories. Chemical synthesis going on, it gets pretty complicated, and that's a whole other realm and ball game, but it is part of health. Pharmaceutical companies, they provide a huge role for us. But we're not talking about Western medicine today, for the most part. We're talking about indigenous health, which might rely upon Western medicine. But for eons, well before Western medicine came along, we relied heavily on, and sometimes still do, on traditional medicine. And so it's been part of our culture, and I say our because I forgot to tell you, I am American Indian. I am Comanche, enrolled with Comanche Nation. I have a CDIB card for the Chickasaw, and I have heritage with the Cherokee Nation as well. So traditional ways, those are kind of been our clinical trials for thousands of years. Here's a plant, try this for your headache, and we've been doing it for thousands of years. Those are our clinical trials. And then we use natural materials, okay, natural materials. And one natural material I want to share with you real quick, and I'm not going to give you too many specifics, but just some generalizations. Has anybody ever seen this particular painting before? Well, it's related to the Kiowa and the Comanche people. It's called the peyote ceremony. The peyote ceremony. And so I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the peyote ceremony, but I want to see your faces while I talk about it. So I'm going to stop sharing this and come back in person, because I want to be with you when I talk about this. And I'm going to put on my glasses. I'm over 20, so I have to have reading glasses now. So peyote, has anyone heard about peyote? You can raise your hand. If you haven't, that's not a big, okay. So peyote is important to the Comanche people. It's a very important medicine that comes from a cactus from Mexico, southern Texas, up into Arizona, and it's illegal to possess or hold that plant. Why? Well, have you heard of the term Schedule I drug? It is a Schedule I drug. However, myself as a Comanche person, I can possess this cactus in my house. I can participate, and for the record, no, I have not. I could participate in the peyote ceremony. So peyote, what's so exciting about peyote? Well, the Comanches, Kiowas, a lot of other Plains tribes have used this cactus in ceremonies to lift themselves spiritually from the earth, to think about visions before they might go into battle, to envision what's going to happen the next day during that battle, what to expect, and other things. But it's often referred to as Comanche church. It's a very, very important ceremony. Well, is anyone familiar with the drug addiction problem in Indigenous people in our communities? Well, a few numbers, and fortunately there will not be an exam, but in the U.S., and that includes Canada, or excuse me, the U.S. includes Alaska and Hawaii, of the population, only 1.3% are American Indian. Of that group, 10% indicate they have a drug addiction problem. So why do we have drug addiction problem with American Indians in such a high rate today compared to 150, 200 years ago, before colonization, before Western or Europeans invaded our lands? Have you ever thought about that? Here I'm Comanche. My people have used peyote for thousands of years. It's been documented back to 6,000 years in the archaeological record. So those weren't Comanche, but ancestors. So why is drug addiction, why was it not a problem 150, 200 years ago? Well, let me lay this on you. It's a ceremonial plant. The drug that is Schedule 1, it's very similar to LSD. And LSD is a hallucinogen, which this is. It's a psychedelic. It's similar to that. We found that out through science. And this is where I segue or coalesce my Western training as a scientist and my traditional ways as an American Indian. So do you know what the penalty would have been 200 years ago if we were in camp, in the Comanche camp, and you were caught with peyote? Any ideas? Well, it renders the problem. It's called death. You would be killed immediately. So we were not allowed to abuse these substances because of the penalty and harsh, but more importantly, because of our upbringing, our training. It was ceremonial. We did not abuse drugs. They had specific purposes in our lives. So again, this is just my philosophy from what I've read, people I've talked to. But I think it's important to talk about drug addiction to American Indian youth, because you are our future. It's very important that you all take care of yourselves and each other. We're all one in this together. So anyways, that's a little bit about peyote, a little bit about Comanche, a little bit about drug addiction. And it's a Schedule 1. And heroin, it's highly addictive. It's a Schedule 1. So it's a very potent drug. And before I talk about plants in a minute, I want to give everybody this caveat. All plants are toxic. All plants are toxic. Repeat me. I'm going to watch your lips. All plants are toxic. Thank you. So how are we able to eat the plants and not die? Well, they're all toxic. It's just the toxicity levels vary among plants. Even similar plants like sage I'll talk about. Some of those are very, very toxic. Some are not. So how was knowledge shared among Native Americans? Oral history. And this is another battle I have between my Native side and my Western trained scientist side. We write everything down, document everything, and share everything as Western scientists. But as a Native American, a lot of this information is sacred. It's not to be written down. It's not to be shared. Again, I still have problems with that, because if you don't write it down, it's lost. And I'll give you an example in a minute. Okay, so just a little bit about that. I want to come to share my screen again with you. Thank you for indulging me on peyote in class 1 scheduled drugs. I think it's important. So that's a little bit of a coalescing between Western medicine and traditional medicine, okay? And again, I use both. I'm a fan of both. There are times to use Western, and I think there's times to use traditional. However, there may be times when you shouldn't use one commercial or Western drug when you're using a traditional drug. And in fact, the first time I've ever seen this in the documents you get from a clinic or a hospital was when I went to the Chickasaw Nation Medical Center a few years ago when they opened, and saw my primary care physician. And before I saw her, I was filling out all this paperwork. And part of that paperwork said, let your clinician, your physician know if you're on any traditional medicines. I thought, that's pretty cool. You won't see that in the mainstream Western medicine world, unless you go to OSU. So a little bit about American Indians in medicine and science. Again, my job, I really want to recruit and train the next generation of American Indians into these fields. Have you ever thought about, are there a lot of American Indians in medicine and science? Have you looked around? Are there many of your professors, many of your teachers in school, are many of them American Indian? Well, let's look at some numbers. And then after this, we won't do any more numbers, okay? So look at graduation rates in the US for American Indians. 65% of American Indians graduate from high school. That's pretty low. It's even worse in Alaska and in South Dakota. Of those 65% that graduate high school, how many go on to undergraduate, either junior college or 4-year college? 9.3, and my decimal is in the right place. 9.3 go on to pursue an undergraduate degree. Now that's pursuing a degree, that's not completing their degree. Of those that pursue undergraduate degrees, less than 1% are seeking STEM degrees. So those are very, very low numbers. How many American Indians graduate high school in Oklahoma? I applaud Oklahoma, especially tribes like the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. Thank you all. Yakoke, Choctaw. Look at the numbers. 83%. Yeah, I'm not happy with that, but it's much higher than the national average. And it's because, all right, someone's writing on my screen. Uh-oh. But it's 83%. It's high because of the tribes like Citizen Potawatomi Nation that put an emphasis on education and health. So again, thank you. So some of the greatest barriers for American Indians pursuing STEM and medicine degree, well, there's a lack of mentors. So again, there aren't many people going into these fields, so there aren't going to be very many professionals teaching or practicing medicine. So less than 0.2% of physicians in the US are American Indian, less than 0.2%. Do you know what our graduation rate last year for American Indians was? Of our graduating class of 2020, 16% of our graduating class, 16% were American Indians. So even less become professors at colleges and universities, 0.1%. And even fewer of those become administrators. Okay, so again, there's few that pursue degrees, limited access, quality education, and healthcare. A lot of the rural schools don't have the multitude of people to teach or the resources to teach a lot of the science and math classes that are needed to go into college and succeed. So those are parts of the reasons, in my opinion, from what I've read and studied and observed. So I'm going to stop there with sharing that PowerPoint and come back to you guys. You guys have been sitting around listening to me and other people like student Dr. West. You guys want a little moment to get up and talk and do your thing? Did anyone bring any plants in? And I'm going to rely on Tasia to moderate this part of the session. So she's the one that's going to allow you to talk or mute you. So anyone have anything they brought in?
Or if you didn't bring it with you, maybe you found one yesterday and took a photo. So if you did, go ahead and unmute yourself and share.
I took a photo.
Tell us about it.
So outside we have like a lot of plants. So I just decided to pick my favorite one. My mom says that they're moonflowers.
That it's a what?
A moonflower.
Okay. Is it in her garden or is it growing natively? Because what I call cultivars, those plants that are cultivated by man, very, very differently and look very different than their natural counterpart, and they're planted outside their normal geographic range. So I wasn't able to see that. Go ahead.
They just grow naturally. A lot of stuff grows up naturally. We get like lots of weeds and blackberry bushes, and we even have a mulberry tree.
Oh, cool. Well, I have a plant for
And
you
all
in a
of
little
it has grown naturally because
Okay.
we suck at growing stuff.
All right. Well, great. Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't see that well enough on your camera to.
I've got a couple to mention if you want.
That looks like a poppy behind you.
Yeah, those are my yard, but of course, I live 35 acres, and so in my back I have honeysuckle and a lot of blackberries. And then right here is a leaf from, I don't know if you can see that, but that is a Great American Ragweed. And I mean, there's a lot out of those, especially if you're like fishing, if you can stop by the shore and pick some of those up. Sometimes you'll find like a little worm near the base of them or even inside of the stalks, and you can use it for bait. So.
Oh, cool. So what part do you use for bait?
Well, you don't exactly use the plant. No, you can. I've done that before, and it's done all right. But kind of near the base stalk, sometimes you'll find like little mealworms, or you find just worms in the area of it.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you know what a catalpa tree is? Have you ever seen a catalpa tree? They're not native to Oklahoma, but they've got a real long bean, and oftentimes in that bean there'll be little worms and parasites that you can use for fishing as well. That's cool. Yeah, thank you. And Bo, is that right?
Yes, sir.
I'll come back to you in a moment. You and Corvella, because you both mentioned blackberries. So I've got something for you in a little bit. Very good. Anybody else? Thank you, Bo. Looks like Landon's showing a big sunflower or something. I can't quite see.
Landon, tell us about what you brought.
I got a sunflower.
Cool.
And they absorb toxins and chemicals from soil, but won't leach them out. And
cool.
the flower is used for lung ailments. And the leaf tea reduces high fever, and seeds are rich in healthy fats.
Very cool. Did you find anything specific that the Citizen Potawatomi tribe might use that plant for?
No.
Or for your
That's
tribe,
okay.
what tribe are you, Landon?
Seminole.
Seminole.
Okay. Do the Seminoles use it for anything specific?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, there's a plant related to that we call the compass plant, and it moves about. It tracks the sun throughout the day, and the Comanche and the Kiowa believed that if you saw that plant, you didn't pitch your teepee there because it attracted lightning. So that's another story. So plants can be used in stories, for food, for medicinal purposes. Very good. Thank you for sharing that.
Robert or Robbie, sounds like you have one. Do you want to unmute yourself and tell us about it?
Oh, whose plant is that?
Can you see? I can see the screen. Robbie or Robert, will you tell us about what you got?
It's sage.
What kind of sage? There's only 35 different species and several different genera.
We're not sure on the species.
Yeah, it's probably a cultivar, one of the white sages. It's not as toxic as some of the other white sages that they find in Mexico that has opioid-like derivatives that they use and chew the leaves. So yeah, that's one thing I like about science. We use scientific names, the genus and species, so we know exactly what plant we're talking about. When we use vernacular or common terms, like, hey, that's a sage. Well, before you take a bite, you might want to know exactly which sage that is, or you may take a trip that you don't want to go on.
Right.
That's beautiful. And that's one of my plants I'm going to share with you and talk to you about here in just a little bit. Very good. Thank you for showing us that.
All right. Any last ones before we move on? Bryden or Micah, do you have one?
Yeah, we have one. You remember the tea thing you did last powwow? We still have some of those, so we chose that. These are elderberries.
Cool.
It says it's immune boosting properties and can be used as coughs or lozenges. So that worked.
Well, thank you. And by the way, elderberries are in flower right now. You'll find them down in wet areas, and they've got a big bushy white flower, and they look like a big bushy weed, almost tree-like, but they're flowering right now. And those elderberries, those are really good. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Welcome.
I have one.
Awesome. Who was that? Go ahead and talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there's some vines growing in my backyard. I don't know what this is called, but these are growing on it. I took a picture of it for some reason.
Cool. Thank you. Does it have a real long trumpet-like flower that's orange?
Yeah.
Guess what the name of the plant is?
What?
How did I describe it?
A yellow?
Well,
Wait,
it's
no.
long and orange and it's trumpet shaped.
It looked cool.
So this is one thing I really like about science in traditional ways as well. The Comanche language is very descriptive. The term we use for old man is translated to an otter on its back. Because if you've ever seen an otter floating on its back, it kind of looks like an old man. And then the Europeans, we called them, it translated into monkey without tail. So again, the descriptiveness of the language is very much like the language of science. It's very descriptive. So it's a trumpet vine. Those are native and they're really cool plants, and they have some medicinal purposes as well.
Yep, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, meet me.
right here and Bowie here. And you guys
All
So
right.
do we move on to the plants that I have? And if we have time at the end, we can come back to those that may not have had a chance to share.
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay. I'm going to have to share my screen with you, so I'll lose track of most people, but I'll rely on to see if to reach out to me if I need to unshare the screen and visit with someone. So again, break in anytime. If you have a question or miss something that I've said, please break in at any time. All right, let me see. Where do I want to go? This is where I want to go. Can you guys see this? Do you see my screen? All right. So this is a book on ethnobotany written by one individual. Can you see how thick that thing is? That's a monster of a book. It lists not all the medicinal plants and not all 574 or 572 federally recognized tribes, but it has a lot of plants in there. It has a lot of information on medicinal plant use, foods, clothing, weaponry. It's a great, great book. And remember I told you there was usually one or two people within a community, tribal community, that held all this knowledge. And it was oral. They held it up here. That's pretty cool. So big book. I'll get my big book out of the way. And then Gray's Anatomy. This is a book written by Western Science. Student West, you're off the hook. I won't ask you anything today. So what do these two big books have to do with ethnobotany or medicinal botany or plants in general? I'll tell you what. My wife wouldn't let me borrow her plant press. She's the botanist in the family. In fact, she teaches a course and used to teach one at OU in ethnobotany. She's not here today, so I'm on my own. So what are those two big books for? Well, she wouldn't let me use her plant press, but you can have a plant press at home just like I use. You can get a manila folder, a nice piece of paper, and look what happens when you put a little knowledge on top of it via a book. It smashes it. Okay, we'll be more professional. Press the plant. So this is the first plant that I want to share with you guys today. Anyone identify this plant? Oh, come on, you guys put me on the spot. It's my turn.
Cedar?
I don't know. I can't really
Cedar.
tell.
Okay, cedar.
Yeah, that's a juniper, right?
It is. How's that? Does that focus a little bit?
That's better.
Juniper is cedar.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. How's that? Right. So it is. This one is actually a juniper because that's its genus, Juniperus. And there are cedars that aren't in that same genus, such as the white northern cedar that the Potawatomis use for ceremonies. Northern. Let me see. Why did they use that? It's a northern plant. I thought Potawatomis were from Oklahoma. That's another story for another time.
We're
so
from the
I'm trying to focus on plants that are native to Oklahoma. This is an eastern red cedar. So the eastern red cedar has a lot of purposes for Native Americans where this plant grows. Would you say the plant's out of hand today? When you drive down the road, you look out in the pasture or in a field, are there a lot of these plants out there? Yes, there are. There are too many, in my opinion, and I call them a weed species, quoting my wife, the botanist, because we've managed fires and other things so well that these things have just taken off. But another story. So what did American Indians use this plant for? Well, some of them used them for smudging, that is ceremonial, to cleanse. They used the branches, they would heat them up and put them on the backs of a patient with pneumonia. They would heat them up and put them on a bad ankle, a sprained ankle, or an area that has edema or swelling. And it worked quite well. It would hold the heat. It's kind of like a heat compress. And I don't know if you've ever tried to burn cedar, but if it's green, you can get it kind of, well, pretty warm before it'll flame up. This one I wouldn't put a lighter to, it'd go up pretty quick. So it was used in that fashion. It was used to smoke, and the smoke would be traditionally inhaled to cleanse your spirit. If there were, you know, bad spirits around, it might be used in the teepee or in the household to cleanse and try to rid the spirit. That's what the Citizen Potawatomi would use the northern white cedar for. And the berries are used for multiple things. Has anyone ever tried a berry? Yeah, I wouldn't eat too many. Comanche kids, they would eat them readily. I guess that's why they're so mean. No, I'm just kidding. But they kind of have a turpentine-like chemical in them, so they're kind of tart. They've got an outer waxy coating. Is anyone familiar with the bird called the cedar waxwing? If not, you can Google it later. Yeah. So the cedar waxwing, it likes to feed on these berries. Okay, so it's got ceremonial purposes, it's got healing purposes, it's got edible purposes. A lot of different things are used by this or from this plant. So I'm going to put that plant aside. What about that?
Cedar is like as a tea, but I know if you use like juniper around here in a red cedar, it, you know, it's not too good on your stomach.
It's not, but the Potawatomis use or used to use this particular plant for urinary problems. So how about, this is also Eastern red cedar, but this is near and dear to me because I collected it in a place called Palo Duro Canyon. Palo Duro Canyon is a state park in Texas, and they allow the Comanche people to go in and collect this plant on an annual basis. And why does it have such meaning to me? Because we think it has more power than a lot of the other cedars in the area, because that is the last stronghold for the last free Comanches, Quanah Parker and his band. So a little bit about cedar. I'm going to see if you can identify this next plant for me. Has anybody seen anything like that before?
Sage?
How about you? Yeah, my sage looks a little different than your sage, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing botanists will do when they collect a plant, ideally they get it while it's in flower, and they get the whole plant all the way down to the root. And so one thing I'm not sharing specifics with you about is all these plants, their different parts have different uses. Okay, so the stem would have a different use. The leaves, the seeds, the flowers, they all have different medicinal purposes and uses, and they're available at different times of the year. Oh, stop. That's so much knowledge. Well, good thing the medicine man or woman was here to take care of it. Also, I forgot to mention another use of Eastern red cedar. Anybody know what that is?
Flute.
Yeah, it's a flute. So the wood, the main part of the tree would be used for tools, would be used for housing, would be used for instruments. So back to our sage. We've talked a little bit about it. Sage is used by a lot of Western tribes as well for smudging, for cleansing, for ceremonial purposes. I like to cook with it. It's pretty tasty. When I hear the word sage, other than thinking of smudging and cleansing, I think of Thanksgiving sage dressing. Yeah, so it's got a lot of different uses. And like I mentioned earlier, this particular plant is safe, but there are varieties or species of sage that are not safe to eat. The white sage, it's not listed on the endangered species list, but it's considered of caution because American Indians are fearful that with some of the new spiritual churches and things that are coming up that are using medicinal plants, kind of copying what American Indians are doing, they're afraid that it may become over harvested and lost. And if that happened, not only would the American Indians be at loss, but the other animals in the area that use it, such as the sage grouse nearby, and it would lose its habitat and would lose that animal forever. So biology, science, medicine, tradition, culture, I think it all coalesces very well together. So the seeds were fulminated and used for flowers. Okay, you guys know where your flour comes from? I know, the grocery store. But can you imagine, most of that is wheat, and it's a pretty big kernel. Can you imagine pulverizing the little seeds from this plant to feed a community? Man, those people were busy. We've got it made. They were busy. So some of the seeds and things were ground up and placed in the eye to help treat eye wounds. And as a person would sleep, oftentimes the eye would heal. And if there were a substance in it, would help wash out that foreign substance. As a scientist, I'm thinking, how did that happen? Probably because it was an irritant, and it made the lacrimal glands provide more tearing, and that more tearing would provide more liquid, thus flushing that foreign object out of the eye. So that's another thing I like to do is learn about these traditional plants and what they're used for, and then look at the science to see what's going on. And we can't always do that. It's used to help reduce fever and also a sedative. It's aromatic, and oftentimes plants that are aromatic just relax you. They make you feel better. Anything else about the sage? Does anybody like iced tea? I bet you'd like one right now. Here you go.
Antimicrobial, right?
Yes, it is. Very good. And so iced tea, you might put a mint leaf in it. Well, sage is related to mint. It's in the same family. And there's a really cool plant. My wife wouldn't let me pick it. It's called mountain mint. And a lot of Native Americans would use that mountain mint to trap and attract mink and otter. Otter's a very important animal to the Comanche and several other tribes. So that's one way we could collect them. Okay, so sage, any questions on the sage? So a lot of different uses.
Yeah. What strain or whatever was that? What species?
Well, what species is that?
That one, I'd have to ask my wife on the species because I can't recall the specific species that occurs in our region here in Northeast Oklahoma. But it is a white sage.
I know that we have that particular species on our tribal grounds because within the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, it's typically women who gather the sage at a certain time of the summer. So just a few weeks ago, we had several women who gathered and harvested some sage near the community garden.
Cool, thank you. Has anyone seen this plant before?
If you were at the tea workshop last summer, like I know some of you were, this was one of the items we talked about.
Is that the same plant bay leaves come from?
No. So this is a sumac, and the genus is Rhus, and there's several species of Rhus that occur in this area, like poison sumac, which you don't want to get a hold of for certain reasons, thus its name. But this Rhus, the Potawatomis use Rhus quite often, and as you just heard the CSA, then you guys have it in the garden, and you've seen it at different areas on tribal land. It's used for a lot of different things. The Potawatomi, for example, I've read that they used it to try to get rid of worms. They would use it to get rid of worms. Also use it to treat miscellaneous diseases. It's also been used to mix the leaves in with tobacco leaves during ceremonial smoking. It's also been used to help treat urine retention. Again, I'm just talking about the plant in general. I'm not giving specifics because I don't want anyone to leave here and go do something and end up in the hospital and they blame that old Smith guy from OSU. So the leaves, the stems, the seeds, the root of many plants are used for medicinal purposes. The berries, this is one that I really like. The berries, oftentimes the berries are used to emit vomiting. So if you have someone that needs to throw up, you can give them these berries. But I read a while back that Comanche children would often eat these berries. And that's all I found out on that, is that they would eat it. It's a plant that's been used to make emulsions and used to treat sunburn treatment. The seeds have been used for dyes. It's got a nice kind of red tinge, although it doesn't give a red dye. In fact, red dye is very, very uncommon in traditional cultures. There's only a few in one place in particular that I know the Comanche used to get red pigments from for their work, and it's a mineral. Can anyone else think of a place you might be able to get a red dye from? I mean, you get blacks, purples, yellows, oranges. But red that's the treasure. That's the holy grail, at least for the Comanche. It was very, very difficult to find. So this plant is in flower right now, and those flowers can be used to treat sore mouths. If you have a canker sore or something in your mouth, you can make an emulsion and kind of gargle it around. It's also used to treat sore throat as well. So I suspect a lot of the chemicals in these plants are reducing inflammation in part, and some of them have an anesthetic effect to them. One thing I didn't bring is snake root or echinacea. It's already flowered, it's come and gone, and it's protected. But its root, if you ever find one, you can clean off the root, do nothing else, and just touch it to your tongue, and your tongue will go immediately numb. It's a wonderful plant. One advantage Western science and medicine has over traditional is they can regulate the concentration and the amount of the drug that's consumed. We know that each plant is going to have a little bit of a different amount of these different chemicals, and they vary throughout the different parts of the year. We know that plants, they go dormant, right? So they're going to lose their leaves, and all that fluid and chemical and molecular stuff is just going to go back down towards the roots. It's going to stay in the stem and the xylem and the phloem. Ooh, some botany terms there. Okay, you learned a little bit. So anyways, does anyone have any questions on sumac? It's pretty popular for teas.
That's what I was going to say. We made it last year with a tea workshop with Kaya Deer and Water, who works for the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. Potawatomi would use it for sumac aid, or you use the berries and steep them a certain way, and they taste like lemonade. It really does. You don't have to add anything to it. You could add some sugar or some maple syrup, but just the berries alone have a lemony flavor. Like it's particular on how much you use and at what time of the year, but it's pretty crazy how much it actually tastes like lemonade without using any lemons.
Yep, thank you very much. And she brings up another point. It's the time of the year, the part of the plant, but also how they treat the plant before you drink it or eat it. For example, the berries that we were talking about, sometimes you may boil off a couple of different water treatments to reduce the toxins. And is anyone in the room familiar with pokeweed? It's flowering right now. Pokeweed, it's got a big broad leaf, and in about a month it's going to have really big blue, beautiful purple berries.
Those now in my front yard, I can actually grab some. Do you want me to?
So pokeweed is very toxic, but my grandmother, who was Comanche, she used to cook it for us all the time, but what she would do is cook it and boil it off 3 or 4 times, and that's getting rid of the toxins. But it was one of my favorite greens. It's very much like chard or collard greens. It's really a good plant. So thank you for reminding me about that. Any other questions?
If you want to go grab one, Bo, to show us, that'd be cool.
Okay.
I am on my way right now.
All right. Yeah, so it's interesting about the sumac, and it is a pretty popular plant for teas. It certainly is. Oh, this next one's for Bo, and Corvella, so I'll hold off.
One thing that I think is really neat that somebody who, has studied Potawatomi medicine shared with me is that often for Potawatomi, you know what a plant is good for based on the shape of its leaves or the shape of the plant. So often, sometimes the color too. So if it's good for, say, your heart, it may have a red component, or maybe heart-shaped pieces. Same thing for lungs. And so just as Dr. Smith was talking about, the people who are well-versed or who are experts in Indigenous medicine, they know so much about all the different ways that medicine can be used, and they remember it. And there's just teachings upon teachings about how to know what it's good for, where to pick it, how much to pick at a time. It's really fascinating. Like, for example, there are certain barks that are used as bases for like painkillers, like kind of like aspirin or Tylenol. And we're taught that when you gather those, you only gather what's at your eye level. And part of that reason is because we're all different heights. So if we all harvested from the same part, we would hurt the plant and might make it go extinct. But if you only harvest at your eye level, and since we're all different heights, then you don't over harvest it. So there's teachings like that even to make sure that you don't overdo it whenever you're collecting that plant.
Tasha,
All right.
there also be a component as to time of year on certain plants that you can only harvest them during certain time frames. You wouldn't want to harvest them it depends on the plant, but there are some that the time of season on that plant is critical.
Absolutely. I know there's teachings that we have within the Potawatomi of like when the fireflies are out, that's when you can gather that plant or things like that. So there's even, you're looking at other aspects of nature to know when to gather.
I just got to the one of my poke plants. This is one of the bigger bushes we have. You can see there's some berries right there. They should be visible. You can kind of see the leaves, but they have like a purplish stalk to them. And also about the salad, I know that's a really, that's a big southern dish, kind of in Mississippi, like Gulfport, Biloxi. That's a big dish out there.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Bo. I appreciate that.
No problem.
All right, I'll wait for him to get back in. And Corbella's awake. She's ready for the test.
I've been awake this whole time.
I know.
I
We
just
heard-
had my camera off.
We knew you were awake because we could hear you snoring. I'm just kidding. So, Bo and Corbella, what plant do I have here? Whoops, it's got 3 leaves. I touched it. Should I be worried about that?
Not if it's dry.
Wrong answer. If it were poison ivy or oak and I touched it, it's dry. Depending on your sensitivity, you still could have a reaction.
Call me lucky or not, but that stuff doesn't get to me.
That's true, but it's a type 1 allergy, so any day now it may get you. So be careful. Okay.
My dad, he was working on like planting new grass and planting my mom some flowers, and he got some of it like right here on his arm, and he was like, "I'm gonna go wash it, but first let me do all this." And then he didn't wash it in time, and so he had it like all over his arm.
Mm.
And then he hugged my mom and got it all over her arm. She was like, "You contaminated me."
Oh no. Okay, you guys want to identify this plant for me?
It has that same shape as a blackberry. I don't think it is.
If I can't see thorns, it's not a blackberry bush.
Remember I told you earlier, botanists, they collect the whole plant to make it easier to identify. So I'm kind of being ornery here. It doesn't have any flowers, it doesn't have any roots, and it's just got a little twig with some leaves. But yes, you're both correct. It is almost a blackberry. What grows in Oklahoma, commonly referred to as a blackberry, but actually is not a blackberry, although some will differ and say, yeah, it's a blackberry. This one will grow along the forest floor or out in the open along the floor. The berries are black. They're a little bit smaller than a blackberry. They're very tasty.
Is it dewberries?
Who said that?
Candy, workforce.
I see that. You are exactly right. It is a dewberry. Very good. Very good. And oftentimes it may keep its leaves late into the fall and then turn a really pretty red. But yes, that's a dewberry. Very good. So that's a native. That's not a cultivar. That's a native plant. So it was used a lot by different tribes for different reasons. You know, food, obviously, the berries and the leaves for teas. So keep an eye out. They're putting out fruits right now, but not for much longer. So that's just kind of a fun one. I thought you might be familiar with blackberries. And our grand finale plants. Let me move it carefully. There was a fiddleback in it earlier when I opened it up. That didn't help a whole lot, but any ideas what this plant might be? It's in flower right now. It's got a really pretty orange set of flowers on the ends of the stems.
Is it marigold?
No, it's not. This is a native plant, native to Oklahoma and beyond.
Is it the Indian paintbrush?
It is not, but some people call this plant Indian paintbrush, but it's not what I call Indian paintbrush. It's butterfly weed.
Ah.
And I read that I don't know, years ago, I was confused why they called it Indian paintbrush, but that was a reference. But it's not. It's Alciepus, and it is butterfly weed. It is a milkweed. Has anybody ever handled a milkweed? You know what I'm talking about when I say milkweed? Most people are familiar with it. You go out, break the stem, and what happens?
Yeah.
You get a milky substance on you. It's a real sticky, nasty, gooey stuff, isn't it? Well,
Yeah.
this particular milkweed doesn't have a lot of that milkiness to it, so it's not too bad to collect. But one thing that's neat about it is the queen butterfly and the monarch butterfly, they like to feed off of this, the nectar. So do bees and hummingbirds, by the way. It attracts a lot of nectar feeders. But the caterpillar of the queen and the monarch butterfly will feed off of this plant. And guess what it gets from the plant as a caterpillar growing, eating this plant? Have you ever heard the saying, you are what you eat? Well, this particular plant is full of cardiac glycosides. So cardiac glycosides can do several things for you. They can increase your heart rate, and in high enough doses can actually kill you. And by the way, there are milkweed plants that have very high toxic levels of those glycosides that you do not want to mess with. However, this particular plant, if treated carefully and appropriately on the time of year, the particular part of the plant, and under the correct supervision on how to treat those plant parts before consumed, they were often used by Native Americans for congestive heart failure and for cardiac arrhythmia, which now kind of makes sense because the cardiac glycoside is going to speed up the heart a little bit, might get the rhythm going back more appropriately. So this particular plant used by Native Americans, it is used, still used by, and it's also used by animals like butterflies to consume the toxins to become a toxic body, so that the adult animal, the butterfly, is toxic to birds. If birds feed on it, they die, and then they recognize that coloration of the monarch. Hey, stay away from that. And then you have mimics in the world that will mimic that particular butterfly that's not toxic. And I'll let someone else like Lacey talk to you about that later in the week. But this particular plant is interesting in that it does provide medicinal purposes. It doesn't have as high a level of the glycosides that other milkweeds do. And so again, it can be used for medicinal purposes, but the monarch and queen butterflies using it. It's not their favorite because somehow they know it doesn't have those high level of toxins. You got to wonder about that, don't you? As a scientist, I'm thinking, okay, we got to set up an experiment. How many generations of butterflies does it take before the caterpillars are not growing up on this plant as readily as they would a milkweed adjacent to this plant that's a lot more toxic? So you start thinking about that scientifically, and it's a lot of it's learned behavior, genetics, things like that. So that was my final plant that I wanted to share with you. And if you don't have any questions about that plant, one thing I did want to mention, because I am Comanche, have you ever heard of the Osage orange tree?
Yeah, that stuff isn't fun to work with, like when it comes to carving.
It's thorny, isn't it? So
yeah,
this is a Comanche bow, a traditional bow made by a very good friend of mine, Eric Smith, who also made bows for several movies. And these bows are not just decorative. I actually shoot the bows and I can hunt with the bows. They're traditional bows. So another use for a plant, weapons, protection, provide food, things like that. A couple of things I didn't mention. Certain tribes like the Cherokees will use different parts of the bark of cedars and other trees to make rugs. So for weaving, just lots and lots of different uses for plants and plant parts. What an incredible amount of knowledge tribal entities have on our natural products. And there are people out there that are studying the plants, they're Native Americans, and they're sharing that information with scientists. There's a fairly famous Navajo that's trying to look at every plant on the Navajo Nation, which encompasses a little bit of real estate in New Mexico, a little bit in Colorado, a little bit in Utah, and a heck of a lot in Arizona. So I forget how many thousands of plants he's identified. He's working with botanists from a lot of big schools like Harvard, Columbia, etc. And they're documenting his traditional knowledge and collecting these plants so that they can learn more about them. My wife, when she was at the University of Oklahoma, she was a curator of the herbarium. That's where you place plants. And oftentimes she would have foreign visitors wanting to know where specific plants are because they were looking at those plants like ironweed for cancer research. So a lot of these plants are at risk of being lost because they're not being cared for or protected. So a little bit on plants, a little bit on medicinal botany, medicinal plants. Again, don't go out and start eating the plants. All plants are toxic. Some are less so than others. But there's a plethora of food out there and other resources that we can use these plants for. So one thing I wanted to finish up with, if you will, is I'm going to share my screen with you. And can you see my screen? Everybody see the screen? Whoops, I shared the wrong screen, did I? Let me see. Let's try that again. The puzzled looks gave it away. How about now? Can you see my PowerPoint slide? Okay, great, thank you. So this is a drawing of what's going to be the first tribally affiliated medical school in the United States. This is going to be the Cherokee Nation campus of the Oklahoma State College of Osteopathic Medicine. So student Dr. West, she'll have some first-year students to mentor this year, coming up in a few weeks, and about 55 of those students are going to be on this new campus. So we're really excited about this. We are developing a tribal medical track that will include training our medical students and our residents with tribal nations like Citizen Potawatomi, and they'll also learn about traditional ways and culture as part of their training. Some of that may just be as simple as a language course with the Cherokee Nation, but we all know language is very, very important to our culture. It helps keep it alive. So if you want to ask student Dr. West or myself anything about OSU medicine or the new campus, by the way, I'm the Associate Dean for Office of American Indians and Medicine and Science, and I will have an office and spend time on that campus as well as the Tulsa campus. The floor is open.
Out of curiosity, how many of you are interested in possibly becoming a doctor of some kind, a doctor or a nurse, something within the health sciences?
I've thought about doing the IHS scholarship.
That's great. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow.
Has anyone heard of physician's assistant or a physician associate? A PA? Anyone know what a PA is? We're starting a PA program in 2021. So that'll be an additional clinical track for us. So everyone here has access to my contact through Potawatomi Nation. I can help you reach out to student Dr. West and others. It was really cool to see you guys, spend some time with you. Next time, maybe we can do it in person where we can touch and feel, or even better yet, go on a field trip. That's always fun. In my neck of the woods, though, I did see a couple of rattlesnakes. We have pygmy rattlesnakes up here. They're beautiful animals, but you might lose a finger over them. Anybody have any last questions or comments? We appreciate your time.
Back to the bow you have. I remember working with Osage orange. You have to be extra careful because it's a skin irritant, if I'm correct.
I'm listening. I'm just giving you a Osage bow.
Yeah, I know. I've worked with it, like the wood on a lathe before, and sometimes you have to wear like full sleeves and gloves because that, like the chips that'll be breaking off can be a little irritating on the skin.
Exactly right. So the theme of what I've talked about, and you're helping me, I appreciate that, Bo, is plants are toxic, and some plants are more toxic than others. And the Osage orange produces what some people call horse apples in the fall. And many people will use those horse apples to help keep cockroaches away. Try it. Don't eat one. They're not apples. And don't feed one to your horse.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, why do they call it an Osage orange?
Very good. What's the other name for the tree? Bodark. So Bodark or Osage orange it's a tree native to this area. It's got kind of an orange feel to it. We have Osage Nation, we have Osage County, Osage Reservation. Is there any tie to the Osage tree? I'm going to have you Google that and report back. That's a good question. I like that. So is there any relation to the Osage orange tree to the Osage Nation? I'm glad you asked. Excellent. Good question. There's a very...
There's a giant spider on my window.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Smith. Tomorrow he'll join us and he's going to show us some fossils. So he's got some very old fossils that he's going to demonstrate. Make sure you check your sheet because there are a few things to prepare for tomorrow's session. And then, of course, same as you all have been doing, most of you send in that takeaway sheet. So one thing you learned today, if you send that to me, then you'll be entered in the drawing for some extra special STEM kits. So, Mama P, see you later. We will meet again tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And somebody's got something else to say. What was that? Bye, Blaine.
Yes, okay.
Bye.
Miigwech.
Bye.
Thank
you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, student Dr. West.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Cecilia, do you want to stay on just for a sec?
Sure.
Bye.
Bye, Michaela.
Bye.
All right.
Thanks, Mariah.
Of
So-
course, yeah. Thank you for letting me come.
You bet. Is this format okay? It's pretty much what I was going to do tomorrow, a little bit of PowerPoint, and then just put the fossils under the camera and talk about them.
Yep.
Talk about where they came from and things like that.
Absolutely. And I have a short presentation for the last 30 minutes tomorrow about some of the scholarships. I was going to talk about IHS and ACES and a few other ones.
Good.
Yeah. So, but today was great, and I didn't want to cut off anybody's when they were participating, you know. So,
Yeah, I like it.
but yeah, tomorrow about at 2. So if you'll wrap up around 2, then I'll jump on and I'll kind of hopefully connect with them that, okay, so if you're interested in STEM and you want to pursue these, let's start thinking about how you're going to pay for it and what you can do to be eligible for scholarships or start saving or whatever. So I'm going to talk through just that briefly, but I think this was great. What did you think?
Yeah, I just missed being there with